True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick.
Police were surprised by Barbara Stager's lack of emotion when her 40-year-old second husband, Russ Stager, died from an accidental gunshot wound to his head. Within days, Barbara called her insurance company to cash in on Russ's life insurance policy. She would collect her money and life would go on for her and her children. Or that's what she believed. To the untrained eye, Barbara looked like an ill-fated woman, widowed twice in just 10 years. But she had her critics. People who knew that her first husband had also died from an accidental gunshot wound. And in both shootings, Barbara had actually been in the bed beside her husband. In fact, she'd been the one with the gun in her hand. Join us at the quiet end for a very convoluted story of treachery and deception. Barbara Stager was a spendthrift, a liar, a sex addict, a thief, and a killer. She spent her adult life moving from house to house, job to job, and yes, man to man. It wasn't until after her second husband's death that a criminal investigation was initiated, exposing Barbara as a black widow who would do anything for the love of money.
So a nice North Carolina beer is coming from Old Hickory Brewery. I've had a bunch of good beers from them, so I'm sticking with them. This one's called Appalachian Walker. It's an English barley wine, 10% ABV. So it's a dark brown color, off-white head, very nice aroma, brandy, caramel, toffee, dark fruit, and some vanilla. And the taste follows the nose pretty precisely. Got some brandy, some caramel, dates, raisins, and vanilla. This is a medium-bodied beer, and it's certainly a sipping beer, given its 10% ABV.
Well, yeah, and it sounds pretty rich.
It is.
They don't give you calories on these beer cans, do they?
I don't think so.
Huh, all right, interesting. I like that.
I think this only has like 20 calories. I exaggerate.
Yeah, more like 200, I would guess. But who cares? We don't care about that.
Nah.
Let's open it up and drink it.
All right. We've got a few people down here at the quiet end we can share with us.
That's it?
And a Gold Chain guy's here, too.
All right, well, we'll have to talk to him after.
I thought you were going to do that recently.
Yeah.
Haven't caught up with him yet?
No. He makes me a little nervous, but I'm working on it.
Well, we can do it together if you want.
Well, as long as you keep an eye out, I'm good.
Okay. Just don't go anywhere private with him.
Oh, no. What am I, nuts?
Oh, I don't know.
All right, let's start this down at the quiet end.
Okay. We'll start with Barbara, who was the first of 3 children and the only daughter of her hardworking and religious parents. Her mother was more dominant and ambitious than her husband, so she was the one who made the rules in the household. As a girl, Barbara was expected to behave like a perfect, God-loving child. Her parents, James and Marva Terry, had both grown up on large family farms in Durham County, and after they were married, they settled in Durham. James took a job with Duke Power Company, where he made a steady career starting out first as a meter reader and moving up over time to better positions. Marva worked as a secretary at Duke University Medical Center, and eventually she was promoted to staff assistant to the director. So James was a quiet guy, easygoing. Pretty much everybody liked him. Marva was a talkative one, and she also could be quite warm and friendly to people she knew, but to most people she presented a tough exterior. She could be aloof, cool, and rigid, and she certainly was more concerned about appearances than anything else. A lot of people thought of her as a smug, self-centered woman, and as she did gain authority in work, she began to associate with doctors, administrators, and other so-called important people in their community. Now, these were people whose educations, income, and social standing were higher than her own, and these were the ones that she wanted to impress. She never did rise to that level, but she did instill in her daughter, Barbara, the need to impress others, and the expectation that she would rise above her peers in her social and economic standing.
Which sounds like she's motivating her daughter, right?
You would think, right?
But it's actually very toxic, and I think it really changes things for her and makes her a not-so-good person, which we'll definitely delve into as we go.
Yes.
So Barbara was born on October 30th, 1948, and she was born at Watts Hospital in Durham. A year later, James and Marva had their second child, a son who they named Alton. So partially because she was the older child and also because she was a girl, there was really a fair amount of pressure for her to make her parents proud. She always aimed to please. Her mother was very protective of Barbara, but she was also very quick to point out any of her flaws or missteps. So Barbara had astigmatism, and she had to wear thick glasses from a very young age, even before she started school. She was also smaller than other kids her age, but she was an excellent student. Teachers would comment in her report cards about her good manners and her very strong work ethic. Her 8th grade teacher noted that she had to work hard to maintain her high grades, because it really didn't come easy to her.
So she's not like one of these genius kids with a photographic memory that can
Not
sit
at
there
all.
and boom, it's done. She had to work her butt off to get the
Absolutely.
grades.
I don't think she was above average at all. It was just hard work,
Yeah.
which is impressive.
It is.
So every summer, Barbara and her brother attended Vacation Bible School. The family left the church soon after Barbara was baptized at age 10, and then they moved to Ridgecrest Baptist. And that's where Barbara became a devoted member of the Baptist youth. Several years later, the family moved into a new home. Barbara's father helped his father and other family members raise tobacco every summer, and he wanted to live in the country year-round. So before Barbara began the 9th grade, he built a 4-bedroom house on 7 acres just north of Durham. Barbara started the 9th grade then, not knowing any of the other students. But she did okay. In her first year, she joined the Future Teachers of America. She really liked children and planned to become an elementary school teacher. In the summer after her freshman year, her mother had a 3rd child, another son, named Steve. Barbara doted over this new baby brother because there was a big age gap, and she became as nurturing and protective of him as she had been of Alton. She and Alton were really close, and after he started high school, he and Barbara both joined the band. Barbara played clarinet, looking really tiny in the blue and gold big marching band uniform, and Alton was a drummer. He loved that. Barbara noticed the boys in high school, but very few seemed to notice her. She was worried about not being as popular as the other girls and thought she wasn't so attractive. She was slim and petite, 5'4". Her hair was mousy brown, and it was cut in a shoulder-length style. And she always had to wear those Coke bottle glasses. Her church taught that sex outside of marriage was just a one-way ticket to hell. Even thoughts of sex were bad, and they needed to be repressed, because fantasies of sex were just as sinful as the act itself. So that's a tough line to hoe there.
It sure is.
So a goodnight kiss between teens might be accepted by the really liberal Baptist families, but anything else was definitely strictly forbidden. So when you think about that, and then we get into Barbara's extramarital affairs in adulthood, I kind of think it may be a result of sexual repression in adolescence. Some people with more knowledge about this than me have said so, and I tend to agree.
I think that's a possibility. Sure. But living in a time and place when almost all parents were strict, Barbara told her friends that her parents were stricter than others, and her mother in particular was very strict. But Barbara never talked back to either of her parents, and she followed every rule that they gave her. She didn't drink, smoke, swear, or break curfew. She was polite, she was responsible, and she followed her Baptist teachings. In the 10th grade, she got her driver's license, and her parents bought her a used car so that she could drive to school. Then in the spring, she took a part-time job at Duke University Medical Center as a clerk in the collections department, and this was the job she worked at until she went away to college. Barbara had little free time, what with school, her job, other chores, band, and church. But still, she made good grades, and she graduated high school in 1967. She was accepted at North Carolina State University in Raleigh, and that was close to home. But Appalachian State Teachers College at Boone, which is in the mountains of western North Carolina, nearly 200 miles away, offered her a scholarship. So she chose to enroll there. Well, yeah, particularly, I mean, she is still planning to be a teacher at this point, right?
Yeah, that's what she wanted to do. And I think she wanted to get a little more freedom, get a little further away from the parents.
I think that's reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
So the summer before college, Barbara worked full-time at Duke University Medical Center, and she actually saved up enough money to support herself throughout her freshman year. She certainly was excited about getting out on her own, away from the restrictions of life with her parents. She hoped to make new friends and hopefully find a boyfriend. Because we haven't done much in that regard yet, have we?
No. Very sheltered life so far. So Barbara did receive a letter with the name and address of her roommate a few weeks before she left for college. Her roommate was Laura Campbell, and she was an English major, and she and Laura wrote to each other several times before they arrived on campus. They had it all planned out who would bring what for their shared room. But it turned out that they really had some things in common. Both were Baptist, and neither was a drinker or a partier. Both of them liked to get up early in the morning and went to bed by 10. Now, Laura had won the title of Miss Asheville and was competing the following summer in the North Carolina pageant. So next to her, Barbara looked even plainer and felt more insecure. She was definitely really worried about her looks, but that didn't come between the two friends. They were actually very close. Then Laura met a guy. This was Steve, and they met early in the fall, and they began dating exclusively. So this boyfriend had a roommate named Larry Ford, and Larry would eat in the campus cafeteria with Steve and Laura. Laura was really impressed with Larry. He seemed smart, responsible, and sincere, and she thought he could be a good catch for somebody. He wasn't dating anyone, and neither was Barbara, so Laura invited Barbara to join their group for lunch one day. And it worked out. They hit it off. By winter, Barbara and Larry were a couple. So a little bit about Larry. He had grown up near Greensboro, about 65 miles north of Durham. His parents, Doris and Henry Ford, had been childhood sweethearts. Larry was the first of 5 children. He was a soft-spoken guy, thoughtful, and always very helpful to his parents and his siblings. He went to Sunday school, and he joined the Boy Scouts, eventually making it to an Eagle Scout. Although he liked sports and he ran on the school track team, he was actually more intellectually gifted. He excelled academically. He became president of the Beta Club, treasurer of the Inter-Club Council, and secretary of the Junior Civitans. Larry decided that he wanted to be a teacher, so his parents had to make some changes in their lives to help pay for the tuition. Henry quit driving a delivery truck and took a higher-paying job at Guilford Dairy in Greensboro. And Doris went to work at Belk's department store in downtown Greensboro, and she rode the bus back and forth every day without a complaint. Larry also took a full-time job at the dairy to earn money for his college. He wanted to go to North Carolina State in Raleigh, but he also applied to Appalachian State Teachers College in Boone. Appalachian accepted him, so Larry sent a deposit check and enrolled there. He liked it, especially the Blue Ridge Mountains. On visits, his family would go with him on hiking trips and on the trails, and Larry did really well in his first year. He spent hours studying and didn't have much time for dating or other activities. And his parents didn't worry about him. They felt very confident that he had a bright future.
Yeah, and her roommate Laura was really happy that Barbara had such a nice boyfriend. Now, she naturally assumed that the couple was not sexually active because it's something girls like them just did not do. But Barbara would later tell her that she had sex with Larry the first time they were alone together, in a closet of the campus band room. Well, they moved a little quickly there, huh?
Wow.
Barbara had a desperate need for affection and approval, and this quickly made Larry tired. He's worn out.
Yeah, he wasn't as excited about this as she was, and he didn't even mention that he had a girlfriend when he wrote home.
Nope. As far as his folks knew, he was there celibate and studying.
Exactly.
So Laura felt that Larry wanted to back away from Barbara just because she was pushing him for a relationship too quickly. On a snowy Saturday night in February, Laura's feeling was confirmed. Barbara came home to their dorm room that night in a nearly catatonic state. So Laura asked if she was all right, but Barbara sat on her bed with her head down, all the while making animal-like noises. None of the dorm mates could get Barbara to talk, so they called the dorm mother. And when she couldn't get a coherent response, she called the campus police, who took Barbara to the hospital, and Laura accompanied them.
Yeah, but Barbara didn't talk to anyone. They sedated her and kept her at the hospital overnight. Laura called Barbara's parents to tell them what was going on, that she was in the hospital, but they really didn't say much. They actually didn't seem surprised or concerned. Barbara was fine the next day when Larry and Steve went to the hospital in a borrowed car to take her back to the dorm. Barbara never talked about the incident, but within a couple of days, she was back to her normal self. Later, Steve told Laura that Barbara's weird behavior had happened after Larry had told her he wanted to break up. But by then, Barbara and Larry were already back together. And Barbara's parents never came to check on her. So Laura had to wonder, is this because they've seen Barbara act like that before? Barbara's episode may have been a genuine reaction to stress, but it may have been a ploy that Barbara used to get her way when things weren't going the way she wanted.
Well, you could certainly take it that way.
Well, otherwise I think her parents would have been concerned.
Yeah. They probably knew something that her roommate didn't.
Exactly. So in May, Larry made a surprise visit home to talk to his parents. Now, he hadn't even told them that he had a girlfriend, but now he was going there to tell them that his girlfriend was pregnant.
That's a good conversation.
So Barbara was about 2 months along, and she told Larry that he didn't have to marry her, but he wanted to do the right thing. So Barbara had become pregnant only a couple of weeks after Larry had tried to break up with her. But if he suspected that she was trying to trap him, he didn't say so. Now Larry's father, older and wiser, had suspected it. And soon afterward, Larry told his father, "Dad, I wish you'd told me about women like that." So it was too late for him to say anything now, and Larry just had to accept responsibility. Besides, he said he really did feel like he loved Barbara. But he'd never had a relationship with a woman before, so...
She was his first.
First and only.
And I can kind of admire him feeling responsible, but he really didn't need to stay with her.
No, he didn't, and sometimes that's not the best for the children either.
Right. So they got married on May 21st, 1968, in a church near campus. Larry confided to Steve about Barbara's pregnancy, but Laura didn't know anything about it. Only 1 week of classes remained in their school year when Larry and Barbara got married, so they both stayed in their dorm rooms to finish out the year. But Barbara stopped going to classes, and she actually dropped out of college.
Yeah, so Larry's family didn't meet Barbara until after the wedding. The Fords went out of their way to make her feel like part of their family, but it was just awkward. Barbara was anxious and didn't talk much, and the Fords thought that she was too openly physically affectionate with Larry. Now by that I mean that she would kiss him like full tongue and grope at him right in front of his parents. And these are, some old strict Baptists.
Must have gone over big.
Yeah, so Doris really wanted to like her new daughter-in-law, but there was something about her that did bother her. And Larry clearly had his own reservations about the marriage. His unhappiness led him to withdraw from Barbara. And Barbara's strong sexual urges and her compulsive spending made things much worse. But early on, they had many distractions. With the baby coming, Larry had to find a job. He and Barbara would need a car, a place to live, and furnishings. So after Larry finished his sophomore year, he and Barbara moved in with his parents. He got a job at a manufacturing plant, and Barbara went to work at a local hospital, filing insurance claims for emergency room patients. After the initial shock of this unplanned pregnancy wore off, Barbara's parents were okay with it and they supported her. They wanted to help her make the best of things. Her father helped her and Larry buy a used mobile home in Durham, With a finance company loan, Larry was able to buy a used car, too. With their combined incomes, Larry and Barbara made enough to pay their bills and also to cover Larry's return to college in the fall. They decided that Barbara would keep her job and stay near her doctor, and Larry would return to college and start his junior year, living in the dorm. Larry's sister Jane, who was a senior in high school at that time, sometimes would spend nights with Barbara to keep her company and to help her out. Jane really looked up to Barbara, but she felt that, despite her upbeat facade, Barbara was kind of unhappy. Only a year earlier, Barbara had been starting college and she had a bright future. Now here she was, a dropout, married, and 7 months pregnant, living in a trailer in the country. She wasn't living the dream.
No, but Larry's at college hanging out with friends, and as far as Barbara was concerned, he was having a blast.
Well, he was probably having a better time than she was. I would say that.
I'm sure.
But she resented that. She didn't like that at all.
Yeah.
So she had a son on December 2nd, 1968, and they named this boy James Bryan in honor of Barbara's father, and they called him Brian. Larry barely made it to the hospital before his son was born, and he was truly happy to be a young dad. When his parents, Doris and Henry, went to see the baby on the day after his birth, they were really startled again because Barbara grabbed Larry and began kissing him passionately in front of everyone. She seemed to be trying to put hickeys on his neck. It was that bad. And Larry would just kind of pull away, and you could tell he was embarrassed, but he would protest and just kind of try and make it look like a joke. But it was clearly inappropriate to the people that visited. They weren't comfortable with it at all. It seemed odd.
It was.
Because it wasn't just affection, there was always this sexual tilt to it, which was weird.
Yes.
Yeah.
So after Christmas, Larry got a job managing Ivy Hall on the edge of the college campus. And the job included a small salary and a free 3-room apartment on the first floor. That's a good deal. So Larry sold the trailer, moved his family into the apartment. Now, they did have to share a bathroom with other students, but it was preferable to living in the trailer out in the middle of nowhere. They did have a tough time making ends meet, so Barbara took a part-time job as a sales clerk at Sears.
Well, for Larry, the pressure of living on a tight budget, being a husband, a father, a full-time student, and the boarding house manager was exhausting, and you could imagine why it would be. So his grades kind of fell off. He wasn't able to manage his schedule of classes. So to make up for that, he decided to stay in Boone after finishing spring classes and attend summer school. Larry's sister Jane enrolled at the same college that fall and spent time with Larry and Barbara, sometimes babysitting Brian for them. Jane noticed a big change in Barbara, though. She had become very, very brazen about sex.
I don't know how she could be any more, but I guess she could.
Oh, absolutely. Like one weekend, Jane and her new boyfriend went for a ride with Larry and Barbara kept coming on to Larry, actually grabbing at his crotch and giggling in front of the other couple. Larry would protest and seem really embarrassed, but Barbara didn't seem to realize how inappropriate she was behaving.
And then that fall, Jane babysat one Saturday while Larry and Barbara went to a college football game. Now, after the game, Barbara said that she had seen a man in the crowd whom she recognized. And then she said the guy had attempted to rape her while she was in high school. Now she's certain he's looking for her. What concerned Larry about this story was that Barbara had not seemed frightened by the incident, but excited by it. You know, like some kind of high school fantasy coming true. It was some weird sexual fantasy.
Yeah. Well, Barbara did find a better paying job as a teller, and this was at First National Bank of Eastern North Carolina. And soon she was telling Larry about men who made suggestive remarks to her at work. Barbara insisted that Larry do something about the sexual harassment she was suffering. So finally, Larry went to the bank and confronted her boss, who was supposed to be one of the offenders. But Larry really embarrassed himself because the man seemed to have no idea what he was talking about, and he denied saying or doing anything inappropriate with Barbara. So maybe he was lying, but it really seemed that Barbara was making up these things just in order to get attention, because that was the kind of stuff she liked to talk about. Men were always hitting on her.
Everything had a sexual theme.
Kinda, yeah. Something wrong in her mind there. And again, I think we could go back to her childhood for at least part of that.
Yeah, well, we don't know how anti-sex her parents were, right?
Right.
We just assume they were Baptists and sex before marriage and so on was a horrible thing.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't have really anything that says how much they hammered that point home.
No, we don't. But I think the church was pretty strong about it, especially this was a while back.
Right.
So that summer, Barbara returned from a trip to Greensboro and said that she had checked by the draft board and had bad news for Larry. She told him he was about to be drafted. So Larry talked to his dad, who encouraged him to ask for a deferment. You know, he had a wife and a child, and he was still a full-time student for at least another 6 months. But Larry said, no, I'll have to face my military obligations sooner or later. So he just said I might as well go ahead and get it done, and he joined the Marine Reserves. Now that way he'd only have to be away for 6 months of active duty. Then he could return to do his student teaching and finish his degree. But later the Fords learned that Larry had not been in danger of being drafted at all. Barbara had actually made this up, and Larry's parents suspected that Barbara was trying to just get Larry out of the picture so she could see other men.
Well, you know, from our standpoint today, it's easy to say the draft board's not going to tell this guy's wife that he's about to be drafted.
Yes.
He's going to get this official letter from the board saying, your lucky number is up, boy, come on in.
Well, yes.
So if they had thought about it a little, they would have figured that out.
I think you're right, yeah.
So Larry went to San Diego for his basic training, and this left Barbara and the 20-month-old Brian living with his parents. Now, they still had 3 other children of their own at home, so they were happy to have Barbara and their grandson there, but Barbara seemed pretty unhappy to be there. Sometimes she'd go out at night and she'd leave Brian with him, and then she'd return late, just acting all excited and happy. So Larry's parents suspected that she was seeing other men, but they had no proof, and they would never confront her about that. Nor did they mention their suspicions to Larry, because they were afraid they might be wrong, and he might think they didn't like Barbara.
Yeah, so that's a tough spot to be in. I think I'd probably have to tell him, but I don't know if that would be the right thing to do. Probably not. What do you think?
I think they would have needed to tell him.
Yeah, especially since they're just getting hinky feelings all over the place about this girl, right?
This didn't come out of the blue.
No.
And they've loved their son. They're not real sure about Barbara, their daughter-in-law. I think it would have been a nice thing to do, to tell them what they suspected.
Well, sure, he probably had the right to know. What he did about it would be his own choice.
Sure.
But they weren't sure, and I can understand why you wouldn't. I could see either way why you'd make that decision.
Yeah, certainly. I can too.
So in October, Barbara told the Fords that she had a dinner appointment for a job interview. She had her hair permed and then left for the appointment all dressed up. Then she came home happy, telling them that she was hired. She had a job at a bank. Then she showed them a set of sheets and pillowcases and claimed she was given them for taking the job, along with $300 in cash that she said was a salary advance. So this was very strange. That just doesn't happen.
It really doesn't.
And also, this was just the first of many times that Barbara would claim to get expensive gifts from employers. So I would have to think she was a bit of a shoplifter. I'm not sure about the cash, where she got that.
Well,
who knows? That could be a sexual thing.
It could be.
Because she did like money.
Quite a bit.
And we know what else she liked. So maybe she was taking those 2 things and kind of trying to augment her life.
It wouldn't surprise me.
No.
Now, with this new job, which she did actually have, right?
Yes, she did actually have the job.
She had to move. She would have to live in High Point, so she started looking for an apartment there right away. Larry's parents were pretty relieved, actually, that she wouldn't be staying there. She seemed to be up to things, and they didn't want to know about these things. So Barbara moved all her belongings out of the Ford's house and into a new 2-bedroom apartment in High Point. And on October 16th, she started her new job at North Carolina National Bank as a clerk in the Consumer Loan Department. Larry returned from his Marine training 4 months later and settled into his apartment with Barbara. Now, it was too late for him to do his student teaching that year, so he took a job at Sears in downtown High Point, where he sold carpet, furniture, and curtains. And on Sundays, Larry and Barbara went to visit his parents for the big family dinners that Doris made. Barbara definitely wanted a more exciting life than that, though.
Oh, absolutely. She seemed like she was trying to look better than other people by buying things she couldn't afford, and we know that her mother did the same thing. But she was even worse. She was always buying new clothes, jewelry, and things for the apartment. She never seemed happier than when she was buying something, especially something expensive that she could show off to others. But then Barbara didn't like her apartment, and less than a year after she'd moved into it, she found a small house for rent, so that was a step up for them. Barbara's preoccupation with sex began to come out in her conversations at the bank where she worked, and people were a little weirded out by that. Her boss began getting complaints from other women about Barbara's open talk about sex and how it bothered them. Apparently, she'd give them some really kind of raunchy details about the sex she had at home with her husband. She was also openly flirtatious with male employees and customers. Barbara made friends with other women in the office, but then she'd do something and they'd be turned off and they wouldn't want to be with her anymore. Like, for example, she'd ask for help with her work from the other women, and then once her work was done, she'd leave early, and they'd be backed up trying to finish their work. So that didn't go over well. She just wasn't a team player, as they say.
No, she wasn't. Now, a big part of her job was processing loan applications and payments from car dealers. In 1973, her co-workers couldn't help but notice that she was getting very friendly with some of the bank's customers. Now, Larry actually figured this out himself when Barbara told him she's going to spend a weekend with a group of girlfriends at a beach cottage. And after she left, Larry got a late-night call from a strange woman asking him if he knew where his wife was. The caller hung up the phone before Larry could question her, and this is way before the invention of caller ID, so he had no way of knowing who called him.
No, but that would make you wonder. You'd be pretty suspicious, wouldn't you?
Certainly would.
And Larry was suspicious. So he tried to find Barbara and check on her. The beach house didn't have a phone, so he called the police on the island and asked them if they could do a check of the house for Barbara and tell her to call him. The police reported back that nobody was staying at the house that weekend. So no one knows if he ever confronted her about this deception. But they did stay married despite they were really growing apart and having some serious trust issues, as you can imagine.
Well, it sure would seem that way. So later that year, they were planning to buy a house. This house was in a new subdivision, and it was just 5 miles south of High Point. So they negotiated a loan with a savings and loan company and signed a contract for the house, where they agreed to pay $27,000. Larry's parents thought he was going along with the purchase to please Barbara, and they were certainly worried that he wouldn't be able to afford the payments. Barbara began buying new furniture, had it delivered when she and Larry finally moved in, because everything had to be just right for Barbara.
Yes, and Larry's parents were concerned that they were getting way over their head. Then months later, Larry told his parents that he had found out that Barbara had been having an affair. He wouldn't say who Barbara had been sleeping with, but Barbara's affair was common knowledge with the bank staff. Several of Barbara's co-workers had met Larry, and they all really liked him, thought he was a super nice guy. So they couldn't understand why Barbara had gotten involved with this man, Ken Hazelwood. He was 11 years older and very loud and very aggressive. Barbara's supervisor knew Hazelwood well because Hazelwood had worked for him at a car dealership some years back. He was described as a rough character. It seemed like Hazelwood was just in trouble of some kind all the time. So knowing that the marriage wasn't going well, people were really surprised when they learned just before Christmas of 1973 that Barbara was pregnant again. Larry's parents hoped that this meant that he and Barbara had worked out their problems. Larry finished his student teaching and he was awarded his degree and teaching certificate that February, He was promised a job in the Randolph County schools starting in the fall. So meanwhile, he had to find other work, and there was a more lucrative opportunity that came up as an office manager for an electrical insulation company. So he put off his dream of teaching in order to earn more money, because they had a lot of debt.
Yeah, they did. A short time ago, Jill asked me to do an ad for premium membership in True Crime Brewery. I did the ad, and then Jill told me, wow, it really generated a lot of interest. So maybe since I was so good, I should do more ads. Now, I'm a little suspect of her motives, but subscribing is a clever thing to do, because by subscribing, you can get your TCB episodes commercial-free, plus enjoy an extra ad-free bonus episode each and every month. You also get a TCB gift of your choice, a handwritten thank you note, and some miscellaneous TCB swag. So if this sounds like something you might enjoy, just go to tygrabber.com and click on subscribe to see your options. Subscribing is a great way to support the show while getting some bonus and ad-free shows for yourself. What could be better?
Barbara gave birth to their second child, Jason, on July 27th of 1974. And after this delivery, she had a tubal ligation. Larry and Barbara's marriage continued to deteriorate, however. When Barbara went back to work, things seemed to have cooled between her and Hazelwood. But her co-workers noticed that she had become friendly with several other men. She told some of these men that she was separated from Larry, but she continued to live with Larry, and she lied to him and had extramarital affairs. Then Barbara had an affair with a man who she became more serious about. She wanted to marry him, but he was hesitant. So Barbara moved out, taking her sons with her, and got an apartment near the bank. And when this guy broke up with her, then she went back to Larry, who really wanted his family to be back together. He was worried about his sons, and he wanted them to have an intact family. So Barbara soon left her job, and she became a receptionist for a manufacturing company. Larry stayed in his office manager's job, and he also taught martial arts classes. He was a red belt, helping teach beginners and volunteering his time at the boys' club. Barbara did really well at her job, and she was promoted to the secretary for the company president. It didn't give her much more money, but she got to travel for business, and she ended up in bed with her new boss. So in 1977, Barbara left that job suddenly after his boss's wife found out about their affair. Of course, she didn't tell Larry why she had lost her job.
No, well, not the real reason anyway.
Right. So she was unemployed for a while, and then she decided she'd study to become a real estate agent. But during this time, she didn't cut back on her spending, even though her income was gone. So she was behind on many of her payments, and she was writing bad checks to cover some debts. So it's really unclear now how much Larry knew about these financial issues, but he just had to know they were in financial trouble. Barbara liked to handle the finances. But during this time, it's believed that Barbara continued to have sexual affairs with other men as well. Her behavior has been described by those who knew her at the time as very odd and sexually inappropriate, and it really seems like she was a sex addict. Some of her behaviors and the sexually explicit talk remind me of what I've read about Bob Crane. You know, that late actor who was obsessed with pornography, and he would videotape sexual encounters with women, and he was murdered.
He was a rotten guy.
Yeah, well. But her behavior seemed similar, like just saying sexual things in mixed company at strange times, you know?
Yeah.
One of those people it's hard to be around because they're odd. Very uncomfortable.
Very.
Yes.
Now, Larry got a black belt in Taekwondo mid-March. He had been working more than 4 years toward that goal, so his class was proud and really happy for him. Larry was the most popular member of the class. He was always good-natured, always even-tempered, and always eager to help out. 2 female members of his class were especially impressed by his focus on his family. He loved his sons, and he often brought them along to class. Larry didn't talk about his personal problems, but after he got his black belt, he did mention to one classmate that things just weren't going great at home. He didn't give any specifics, but he did seem quite sad. Now, he was talking with two women after class on March 14th when he mentioned that somebody had been following Barbara home from work at night, and she had asked him to buy her a gun because she was afraid. So we got a new wrinkle to this saga now, huh?
The big wrinkle.
So on Monday, March 20th, 1978, Minister Barney Pierce got a call from Barbara. He really didn't know her and her husband because they had just been accepted for membership at his church, but they hadn't yet taken the final step to join the congregation. It was kind of like he knows of them, but he wasn't that acquainted with them yet.
Right.
Now, he had visited their house a couple times and just didn't know them that well yet. But when she called him, Barbara told him that 2 times in the past few days, somebody had followed her home from work at night. She said that she wanted to buy a handgun for protection, but she needed somebody to be a character reference so that she could get a permit. So basically, she wanted the minister to be her reference, and he agreed to sign for her to get a permit.
Yeah, so this is something that used to actually be a thing that you could do, is just get a character reference to sign a permit, and then you could get your gun. And this was before the digital age when they couldn't do a quick check of you. But it was just odd that she asked this person who barely knew her.
Yeah, that is strange.
Yes.
Although it's a man of the cloth, so that might help in her mind, right?
Oh, sure, I'm sure it did. Yes, this was a very religious area. I'm sure he held some clout. So the next morning, March 21st, Barbara arrived at work and she told a coworker that she wanted him to go with her to buy a gun. She had told him before that people had been following her home. So that same afternoon, they went to Hunter's Haven, a small gun store down the street from her real estate office. This coworker, a man named Carlton, suggested that Barbara get a .25. It would be small enough for her to carry in her purse, but powerful enough for self-defense. So they picked out a .25 semi-automatic pistol. Barbara also bought a box of ammunition. After they left the store, she asked Carlton if he would also teach her how to shoot. So he agreed, and they drove out to the house of a friend of his in a very isolated area where he showed her how to load and shoot her gun. So both fired it several times. As he was demonstrating to Barbara how to unload the gun, he showed her what was considered to be the most common cause of accidents with semi-automatics. And this will be important.
Yes, pay attention, kiddies.
People would remove the magazine without realizing that a shell would be left in the chamber. So he told her to prevent this from happening, you had to do it a certain way. He showed her how to operate the slide and eject that remaining cartridge. So the day after that, early in the morning, March 22nd, 1978, Larry Ford was found in the master bedroom of his home. He was in his pajamas, lying on his back in bed. The covers were up over his chest and his eyes were closed. So at first glance, he looked like he was sleeping. EMTs were sent to the home at 12:36 a.m. after Barbara called 911. When they pulled back the bed covers, the EMTs saw blood on the sheets and on Larry's pajama top. The skin on his body was purplish with lividity. EMTs found a bullet wound on the right side of his chest. There was a loaded ammunition clip for a semi-automatic pistol lying right next to his left hip. The pistol that had killed Larry was lying on the carpet next to the bed. Larry was clearly dead. The EMTs called for the police and an ambulance came to pick up Larry's body. One of the EMTs recognized that the gun was a .25 caliber. This was the same type of gun that his wife owned, so he was familiar with it. And he knew that this type of gun wouldn't fire without the clip, so someone other than Larry had shot him.
Well, there's still the question of that shell. Even though the clip isn't in it, there's still likely a bullet left in the gun.
Exactly. And she had been warned about that.
Right.
So according to her story to police, she and Larry had watched TV and then gone to bed. He had a groin injury from his Taekwondo class the day before, so he was having trouble getting comfortable to go to sleep. So Barbara had gone downstairs to sleep on the sofa, she said, because he was tossing and turning. She had fallen to sleep, and then she was woken by a loud noise. So initially, she thought that maybe Larry had knocked a lamp off of the bedside table. So she went into the bedroom, but she found him on the bed, gasping for breath. and then she saw blood on his chest. So Barbara called her mother first, although she didn't tell the police that. When asked about the gun, Barbara said that they had purchased it the day before the shooting for protection.
So the authorities decided that Larry had gotten up in the middle of the night to inspect the gun, and he had believed the gun wouldn't fire without the clip. So thinking it was unloaded, not realizing there was a round in the chamber, he had pulled the trigger and shot himself accidentally. The shooting was ruled an accidental death. No autopsy was done, and Larry was buried within days of his death. His hands had been examined for gunshot residue, and they found no gunshot residue on his hands. So this whole story is just unbelievable.
Well, for one thing, they didn't take the swabs or whatever they use for the gunshot residue. They didn't take them to be tested until after Larry had already been buried. And then it seems like they just kind of didn't worry about it until a forensic chemist on the case gave his opinion a couple of weeks later. And his opinion was that Larry had not fired the gun that killed him.
Well, and just thinking about it, okay, let's say you pick up a gun. Your wife just bought this gun for protection, quote unquote, and you're not familiar with them. You pick it up, and you're handling it, and it goes off. And you just happen to have it pointed at you when it goes off?
Yeah, why would anyone ever do that? You should never point a gun at anyone.
No kidding. Anyway.
And then to actually pull the trigger.
It's a suspicious thing.
Absolutely. So the following month, a judge ordered that Larry's body be exhumed and autopsied. The state's chief medical examiner found the bullet that killed Larry. It was lodged in his spine. It had hit his right lung and his right pulmonary artery, which caused massive internal bleeding, which led to his death within just a couple of minutes.
Yeah, that kind of wound would.
Yeah. So examination of the gunshot wound showed that Larry was shot at close range, maybe even with the gun's muzzle touching his chest. They couldn't be sure because his body had been cleaned up and embalmed before it was examined and photographed. So we'll never know for sure, but it could have been.
And his death was reclassified as a homicide. But any investigation into this stalled. It did remain open, but it quickly got moved to the police department's inactive files. Barbara decided that she wasn't going to be returning to work, and this was a relief to her boss because Barbara had not made one sale. When she was asked what she was planning on doing, she said she was going to sell her house and move to Durham. And as she was cleaning out her office, sales agent Stan Bird offered his condolences to her for her loss. He barely knew Barbara, but he considered her to be a quiet homemaker. "If I can do anything for you, just let me know," Stan told her. And Barbara shocked him with a reply, "You know what you can do for me." And she gave him this seductive smile.
Ew.
Ew.
That's just ew.
Double ew.
Wow. So Larry's parents had been so shocked and devastated after his death that they couldn't really think clearly about what had happened. They'd learned very few details of his death, and it took some time for them to think about it and question the circumstances. Larry's mom, Doris, told family members at the funeral that she felt like something was amiss with Barbara's story. So there were really just three possibilities. Larry had shot himself accidentally, or he'd shot himself intentionally, or someone else had shot him. And they didn't believe that Larry had killed himself. His religion and his love for his children just wouldn't allow him to do that. An accident was more likely, but still improbable. Larry didn't even like guns, and why would he be up in the middle of the night playing around with one? It really didn't make sense.
No, it didn't. So his parents didn't want to think that Barbara was responsible, but facts kept pointing in that direction. They had invited her and the boys to come to their house for Sunday dinner a few days after Larry's death. And Larry's brother Ronnie was there, and the tension between him and Barbara was quite obvious. Ronnie was the most suspicious about Larry's death, and after dinner, Ronnie told Barbara that he had found a key to Larry's locker at the boys' club in the clothing that she had given him after the funeral. He would just drop by the club, he told her. Barbara said, "Whatever's in that locker belongs to me and the boys. You got to give me the key right now." So Ronnie didn't. He refused to give it to her. She became increasingly angry. Then as she was standing on the back porch getting ready to leave, Ronnie began asking her questions that showed he had serious doubts that Larry had shot himself accidentally. Barbara told him that there were only two possibilities. accident, or suicide. And Larry didn't have the guts to kill himself, she said.
Ooh, ouch.
Boy, that is cold.
Awful. 15 days after Larry's death, Barbara's former boss, Kay Pugh, and her close friend, Brenda Wilmoth, who was about to leave her husband Tommy, were followed by him as they rode in Kay's Cadillac. And both women were shot by him. Kay actually died from a gunshot wound to her chest. After his arrest, Tommy told authorities that he had shot the two women because he thought his life was in danger. So he believed that Kay, Brenda, and Barbara Ford were involved in a lesbian triangle, and they were all plotting to kill their husbands.
Okay.
So Larry's shooting had convinced him of this, he would say, and he believed that he was the next to be killed. There was no evidence ever found that this was the case, but it definitely sparked some rumors and complicated the case a bit.
Oh, I'll bet. After the report from the forensic chemist came out, which indicated that Larry had not been the one to shoot the gun, investigators strongly suspected that Barbara had shot her husband. Now, a detective called Doris and Henry Ford and asked them to come in for an interview. They were actually quite shocked when the detective told them about the rumors spreading about Larry being killed by Barbara. Although their son Ronnie was aware of the rumors and had been doing his own investigation into Larry's death, this was the first time that his parents had heard it. The detective said he was almost certain that Larry had been murdered and that Barbara had done it. Still, the case went nowhere, at least not until Barbara got arrested for killing her second husband or her next husband.
Right.
Jeez, I just don't know why that murder investigation into Larry's death didn't get further.
Yes, I know.
I mean, they're pretty sure he didn't do the shooting.
Yes.
Who else could have?
I know, it just seems like bad detective work, you have to say, because there was so much they could have found out about her.
Yeah.
That at least would have, shown that she had poor character. And just buying the gun the day before and everything, and being told about there could still be a round in it, just really not smart.
No.
So Barbara and her sons were living with her parents in Durham the summer after Larry died. After collecting over $70,000 in insurance money, she was planning to buy her own house. She wanted to be near her parents, so she began to search in their neighborhood. The first house she went to see was only a couple of blocks from her parents' home, and it belonged to Russ Stager and his estranged wife, Jo Lynn. Russ had been living there alone since their separation. Although Russ didn't mention it when Barbara showed up, he was having some doubts about whether he really wanted to sell the house. And he ended up settling with Jo Lynn and took the house off the market. Barbara was having a sexual relationship with a younger man at this time. She couldn't bring him home while she lived with her parents, so she hurried up and bought a house where she could have sex with this man. So Barbara bought a new 3-bedroom brick house at 5516 Genesee Street, located diagonally across the street from the house where Russ Stager lived. When things got more serious with the younger guy, Barbara talked with him about a future together. But he wanted children of his own, and Barbara had had a tubal ligation after her second child. So when she told him about the tubal, he ended their relationship. So that's when Barbara probably made her decision that the next time she found a guy, she wasn't going to tell him about that tubal.
Well, that's okay.
So
I would think at some point that subject has to come up.
Well, she's going to lie about it. So tell me a little bit about Russ.
So Russ, who's going to be Barbara's next victim, was born in the same hospital as she was, just 5 months earlier. And like Barbara, he was the oldest child in his family. Russ's parents had decided that if their child was a son, they would name him for his father. So he would be Allison Russell Stager III. Now his father went by Al, so Russ was called Rusty, till he got older, and then he was called Russ. Growing up, he was a pretty athletic kid. He enjoyed water sports particularly. And on summer weekends, the family went to nearby lakes to swim and ski. He played on Little League baseball teams, football teams, and by junior high, he was the football team's star halfback. But he had suffered several injuries while playing sports. After an injury to his back, he was warned by a doctor that if he continued to play football, he could possibly become permanently disabled. So that's that for the football career.
I would hope so.
But he did make the baseball team, and he played in the outfield and as a catcher. And by high school, he decided that he wanted to be a high school coach. He was a fit guy, he was strong, had a wonderful personality.
Oh, the girls liked him. One female admirer later said that he had this Robert Redford type of appeal.
Pretty high praise.
Yeah. He had many female friends and could have his choice of dates, but throughout high school he only had one steady girlfriend. Her name was Linda Whitaker, and he had begun dating her in junior high. Russ's parents were never worried about him. They knew that he was responsible, he did well in school, and he was very involved with the church as well. After graduating from college in 1972, Russ spent a semester student teaching in Cary, near Raleigh, where he would be close to his girlfriend, Jo Lynn.
Oh, so the Linda's out of the picture by now, huh?
Yeah, then he got a college girlfriend.
Yeah, okay.
Jo Lynn. The following year, he became a junior high phys ed teacher and assistant coach. His even temper, his persistence, and his optimism really inspired confidence in his students. And many of these kids came from poor families, and he would use his own money to help them buy shoes and other stuff they needed. He even had them over to his house for meals sometimes, or he'd take groceries to their homes. So Jo Lynn just adored him, and they got married in October of 1974. She was a senior in college, majoring in business education, and after their wedding, they moved into a small apartment that was connected to Russ's aunt's house in Durham. 6 months later, they bought a small brick ranch house, and soon after that, Russ took a big step up in his career, becoming an assistant coach at Durham High School. In 1976, they bought a larger house with 3 bedrooms, about 5 miles north of Durham. But within a year of moving into that house, the marriage was in trouble. Jo Lynn heard rumors that Russ might be involved with a student, a high school student, and one night when Russ didn't come home, she went looking for him, and she saw his car at the apartment of a friend of his who was a fellow coach. So Jo Lynn parked nearby, and this was at 2 a.m., and she saw Russ come out of the apartment holding the hand of a teenaged girl. Jo Lynn waited until the next morning to confront him. So he said this was a girl, a troubled student he was trying to help. But she wasn't believing that.
Well, not at 2 in the morning.
No, it's terrible. Jo Lynn accused him of lying and went to her parents' house. But then Russ called her, he apologized, he asked her forgiveness, and he eventually talked her into giving him another chance. But, things just were never the same again. Jo Lynn just could never see him in the same light. So within weeks, they got together at a lawyer's office and drew up a legal separation agreement. But it was an amicable breakup. They were friends. And Jo Lynn moved back home with her parents. After Jo Lynn moved out, Russ was secretly seeing a former student. I don't know if it's the same girl, but she was 17 and he was 30.
Okay.
So after she graduated, she saw him as much as she could, but she was afraid her parents would find out about her relationship with him. So she had just told her 2 best girlfriends about it.
Yeah, the 2 of them thought they were in love, and that Russ wanted to marry her. But she knew that she couldn't marry Russ. Her parents expected her to go to college, and if she didn't, they'd be devastated. So when summer ended, she left Durham and went to college in another state. And Russ did go sometimes up to see her on weekends. And a couple of times she came to see Russ and went to Durham High football games while he was coaching. Then at one of these games, one of the coach's wives introduced her to a new friend of Russ's who had started coming to the games. Her name was Barbara. She was just a friend, Russ told her. She was the new neighbor who had lost her husband. But it was obvious by the way Barbara looked at Russ that she had big interest in him. So by the end of September, the college girl broke up with him. She was way too young to be married, and she wanted to be able to enjoy her college years. And then within a month, he began seeing Barbara.
Yeah, so at this point, Barbara was working at Security Federal Savings and Loan, and that's the same place where she had gotten a loan to buy her house. She applied for the job on September 5th and was hired the following day as a teller trainee. So the woman who trained her got along well with Barbara in the beginning, but then she began to worry. On October 4th, which was just about a month after she'd started, Joanne had a $100 shortage from the cash drawer that she had been working with Barbara. This was the first shortage for Joanne, and no matter how many times she went back through her day's transactions, she couldn't account for the missing money. It was really driving her crazy. And then it was just to the point where she knew it must be Barbara, so she decided she'd keep a close eye on Barbara. Then 2 weeks later, Barbara had a shortage of $350-some in her own cash drawer. 2 checks that she had taken that day added up to that exact amount, and Barbara remembered that she had cashed the checks for the customers and mistakenly posted them as loan payments. But when her supervisor called these customers, each of them said that they had brought in the check as a payment and they hadn't gotten any money back. So the next day, Barbara missed work, calling in to say she had personal business to deal with. She called in sick the next day as well. On November 17th, 2 weeks after she had announced her engagement to Russ, the teller who had trained her had a $500 shortage in her cash drawer. 25 $20 bills were missing. Twice that day, Barbara had asked the other teller how much money she had in her cash box. Now she was convinced that Barbara was stealing. After that shortage, Barbara began to be moved from branch to branch, where she was allowed to fill in wherever a teller was needed. In November and December, though, she had several discrepancies in her cash drawer. Then a check that she had written for $50 and asked another teller to cash for her was returned for insufficient funds. So this is all looking very bad for Barbara.
Looks like she's embezzling, doesn't it? Then at the beginning of December, Barbara wrote a check for $935. This was for her house payment, which she had fallen behind on. This got returned for insufficient funds, but Barbara said it's just a mistake, and the check was redeposited. Then on December 14th, she asked for a $400 salary advance for Christmas shopping. This was given to her, but she was expected to pay it back when she got her paycheck on December 21st. Now, when she hadn't repaid the advance by the 22nd, her supervisor asked her about it. She said she'd be able to repay it soon. And with Christmas so close and knowing that Barbara had 2 children, her supervisor decided not to push it. But by the time Barbara returned to work after Christmas, she still had not repaid the salary advance, and her house payment check had been returned again for insufficient funds. Barbara said that she'd take care of it, but the next day, December 28th, she called to say that she wouldn't be able to come to work that day because she had to undergo a D&C, a dilatation and curettage of the uterus, and have minor breast surgery at Durham County Hospital. Then she called later on to say that the surgery had gone well, but she wouldn't be returning to work until after New Year's. They're not believing much of anything that old Barbara's telling them at this point.
No, they're kind of figuring out that she's a pathological liar.
Yeah. So the supervisor called the hospital, and he learned that no one by Barbara's name had been there for surgery or for any other reason. Guess this is pre-HIPAA.
Yeah. This is pre a lot of things.
Yeah.
But the supervisor audited Barbara's cash drawer and found 2 $100 bills missing. When Barbara came back to work, she was brought in for a meeting with the branch manager, but she had no explanation for her lies and her stealing. The unpaid salary advance, she said, had just slipped her mind, but the manager wasn't buying it. If she paid back the advance and made good on the bad check and the cash drawer shortages, she'd be allowed to resign and they wouldn't take any legal action against her. So what are you going to do? She agreed to the terms. She was allowed to search her records and cash drawer for that missing $200, but couldn't find it. She was given 1 more day to come up with it. The next day, Barbara called and said that her son had found the $200 in an envelope with some other papers in the trunk of her car. So she agreed to return it. Now, of course, they're not believing the story, but whatever. They just want their money back and to be rid of her at this point.
Right.
So no one at the bank was surprised a week later when a check that Barbara had written to cash for $170 and had cashed from her own drawer on her last day of work was also returned for insufficient funds.
Well, they must not have known she wrote that last check, because otherwise they wouldn't let her do it.
Right. Yes, I would imagine. But at this time, Barbara's family was really concerned about her. She seemed like she was on the verge of a nervous breakdown around Christmas time. But she was very careful not to let Russ know about any of her issues. She planned on marrying him. Russ's mother, also named Doris, was concerned about the upcoming marriage. She thought Barbara was pushing Russ into marriage too quickly. The two hadn't known each other for very long, and Doris had just heard about Barbara in the fall, so it'd only been a few months.
Things moved quickly.
They did, because they got married in March of 1979, and that was just a few days after his divorce from Jo Lynn was final. This was also 5 days before the first anniversary of Larry's death. So after the reception, Russ and Barbara drove to a room at the local Ramada Inn, and later that afternoon they flew to Florida for their honeymoon. Barbara's son stayed with her parents. After the honeymoon, Barbara and her boys moved into Russ's house, and she put her house up for sale. Then she took a job as a secretary at a beer distributor. She kept the job for a few months, and then she left. She said the reason that she left was she wanted to spend more time with her children.
And now Russ did know that Barbara's first husband had accidentally shot himself. But he didn't know that Barbara had been suspected of his murder. Now, Larry's death had been ruled an accident, so Barbara received over $119,000 in insurance payments. And she had also been receiving $800 a month in Social Security payments for the support of the children, Brian and Jason. The boys were kept from seeing their paternal grandparents, and Barbara encouraged the boys to call Russ's parents Mima and Pa. Doris Ford had written letters to Barbara and the boys and had sent them gifts at Christmas. And Barbara had sent a letter of thanks in January, but she forgot to mention her upcoming wedding with Russ.
Well, Russ knew his mother and father wanted to be biological grandparents, and just weeks after the honeymoon, as he and Barbara were having Sunday dinner with his family after church, Barbara announced that she was pregnant. Not long afterward, Russ told his mother that Barbara had miscarried. But Doris just wondered whether she'd even been pregnant. It seemed awfully fast. Then after Barbara's house was sold, she and Russ decided they would buy a new house. And after they bought the new house, they spent about $10,000 remodeling it. Russ had always kind of been a big spender. I mean, nowhere near what Barbara was, but a bit of a big spender. And we know that Barbara loved to spend money, so the two of them together were kind of a disaster.
Well, I guess.
And he let her have control of money, too, so he didn't really know all that she was doing.
Bad move, Russ.
Yes. But, it was very important to her to have more stuff and better stuff than anyone else. She had to impress.
Yeah, and certainly this remodeling wasn't the first time that Doris Stager noted that Barbara had really expensive tastes. Before Russ and Barbara's wedding, the women at Barbara's church had given a bridal shower for her. Now, Barbara had offered Doris some towels that one church member had brought as a gift. They were cheap, Barbara had told her, and she wouldn't use them. And besides the house, Barbara had bought a new Cadillac Seville, and Russ bought a BMW. And then they had this house filled with new furniture and a big old whopping big screen TV.
Yeah, but Barbara was jealous. She was afraid to let Russ out of her sight. She would go to all of his games and stay close to him, especially if female students were around. But you kind of can't blame her because he has a history with teenage girls, which he probably should have been in prison for.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. So Barbara started running and weightlifting, and her new exercise habits made her look better than she had in years. She also tanned and cut her hair short, putting in blonde highlights. Then she began to wear contact lenses instead of glasses, wore more makeup, and dressed in her expensive clothes. For a while, she was a bit of a bombshell.
Russ's parents, Doris and Al, really wanted to be close to Barbara just for Russ's sake. But their feeling was that Barbara didn't want to be close to them. Barbara and Russ would come to their house for Sunday dinners after church, but Barbara never seemed to want to stay, and soon she would begin making excuses to leave early. And meanwhile, at her job, she continued with her flirtatious ways. She giggled and teased the salesmen. She said suggestive things to them. Barbara's friends didn't know about sexual comments at work, but they all knew about her preoccupation with sex. She often talked about how much she liked sex, and that she couldn't get enough of it. Russ's friends also knew that Russ and Barbara had a very sexual relationship. When talk on the golf course turned to sex, Russ sometimes suggested that Barbara was wild in bed. Well, that's what I tell my golfing buddies when I play. Actually, wow. I say Jill, not Barbara.
Oh, well, that's good.
Now, Russ seemed satisfied with his sex life, but the strain from the marriage was beginning to take a toll.
Well, I think he really loved Brian and Jason, like they were his own biological children. So he tried to keep things together for them. And he still cared about Barbara, and he wanted to have some children of his own. So Barbara told him she was pregnant again, and then she talked about this pregnancy for several weeks. Then one morning, at a Sunday school class, Barbara stood up when it was time for special prayer requests. And being very emotional, she told everyone how much her pregnancy meant to her and Russ, and she asked them to pray that she would carry the baby to term. Now remember, she's had a tubal ligation, just in case you forgot that fact.
No, I remember that.
Okay.
So it would be very difficult to become pregnant.
Very unlikely.
Very.
Then only a week later, Russ and Barbara went to church and told their friends that Barbara had suffered another miscarriage. So although Barbara would claim to be pregnant one more time and lie about another miscarriage, Russ never learned that these were lies or that she'd had a tubal years back. Over the duration of their close to 9 years together, Barbara and Russ seemed to be happily married. Although they never did have children together, Russ seemed very satisfied with his job, his church, and his role as a husband and father.
Yeah, he adopted those boys, didn't he?
He did, yes. He was a good dad because he was sporty.
Yeah.
So he was really good with the boys. And he was a healthy, athletic guy. He seemed to have a whole life ahead of him. But unfortunately, that would change just a few minutes after 6 a.m. on February 1st, 1988.
Yeah, the 911 call that came in at 6:08 a.m. came from a child. This was 13-year-old Jason Stager. In this nervous, high-pitched voice, he asked for an ambulance because his father had a gun and it went off, and his mother told him to call for help. First responders were sent to Stager's quiet residential neighborhood, not the kind of place where they expected a shooting to occur. So just like Larry Ford, Russ was discovered in his bed. He was on his side, under a sheet and blanket, with a large blood stain spreading underneath his head onto his pillow. He was still alive, he was struggling to breathe, and his heart rate was elevated. The first EMT who arrived turned him slightly to help with his breathing. He was bleeding from his mouth and nose, and the gunshot wound to his head was bleeding into his brain and filled his head with blood and putting increased pressure on his brain. As the EMTs worked to save her husband, Barbara stood watching and saying very little. She did go into a closet and change from her pajamas to jeans and a sweatshirt. Then she was telling people repeatedly how frightened she was of guns.
Yeah, she was saying, "Why did he keep these guns around? They scare me. I don't like them." Just kind of overdoing it.
Had to do the sell, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
Then when she was asked what had happened, she said that she had been pulling a gun out from under her husband's pillow, and it went off. Well, this is a great story. According to Barbara, Russ had been hearing noises outside the house at night, and he was worried about a break-in. So the night before, he had put the gun under his pillow. Now, she had heard Jason get up in the morning and go into the bathroom to shower, and Barbara said she was concerned that Russ might wake up and think Jason was a prowler, so she decided to retrieve the gun and put it away.
No, come on, give me a fucking break. Who's going to believe that?
I don't know.
Really?
Well, she got away with it
Why
once.
would he think a prowler would be going to take a shower? I mean, didn't she at least have 5 minutes to think of a better story?
Well, maybe you could say that
it's terrible.
He heard a prowler. Forget that the prowler was showering.
Well, okay. It's just the story's bad. Very bad.
It's a terrible story. But, like I said, she got away with it once before.
She did, but barely. I think that was because the police didn't do enough.
There's the gun. It's lying between two pillows on the bed. The barrel's pointing toward Russ's head. And there is a spent shell only inches away. The gun was a .25 caliber semi-automatic, and it was still cocked. Barbara told the EMTs that she had already moved the gun.
Sure.
So an ambulance took Russ to Duke University Medical Center. They left the Stager home around 6:43 in the morning. Physicians at Duke found that the bullet had passed through his brain, lodging in the front of his skull. So he was brain dead, and less than 6 hours later, he was declared dead.
So while Russ's family, friends, and the community mourned his loss, the police right away began their investigation. Sergeant Rick Buchanan of the Durham County Sheriff's Department was assigned to the Stager case. He needed to talk to Barbara, and he was surprised that she was more than willing to talk with him. Also, she didn't seem very distressed over her husband's violent death, and she quickly agreed to return to the house and reenact the shooting, where she told her story. So it sounded possible, but something about Barbara just didn't seem right to Sergeant Buchanan.
Well, how does it sound possible?
Well,
I guess you could say, all right, it could happen that way.
Well, he doesn't know about her other husband, so he has no reason to be suspicious of her at first, other than she's the spouse.
Yeah.
So it could have been accidental, but it did seem like a bit of a stretch, right?
Quite a bit.
And when they went back to the house, he was surprised to find she'd already cleaned up the bedroom and washed the sheets. So that was a little off-putting.
Mm-hmm.
But it was actually Russ's first wife, Jolynn, who really helped get the investigation going. After hearing of Russ's death, she insisted on speaking with Sergeant Buchanan in person. During this meeting, she told him that during their entire relationship, she had never known Russ to sleep with a gun. After being in the Army Reserves and the National Guard, he was very careful of guns. She also was in agreement with what Buchanan would hear from Russ's other family members, that Russ was actually a very heavy sleeper. In the past, he'd slept through a house fire and hadn't even heard the fire alarm, so he's not someone to keep a gun in his bed and jump up if he hears a noise. But more significantly, Jolynn explained that she and Russ had 3 conversations about his life with Barbara. In the first one, which happened in July of 1983, he had confided to her that Barbara had gotten them into some financial trouble. He said that Barbara had been hiding the bills from him, and she'd lied about having a contract to publish a book. Yeah, so this is a funny story. She said that she'd written a book about her first husband's death, and that a publisher wanted to publish it. And also, Russ told her that he had caught Barbara cheating on him. He had thought about leaving Barbara, but he stayed for the boys, whom he had adopted. And in their second conversation, which was just a few weeks after that first one, Russ had told Jolynn that if she would take him back, he'd be gone from his home with Barbara in a weekend. And she had told him that they were better off just staying friends. So then their third conversation was much more recent. It was in November of 1987, just a few months before Russ was killed. And he told Jolynn that if anything ever happened to him, to promise that she would look into it. He had told her 3 years earlier that Barbara's first husband had died with her in the house, and he was wondering if the same thing was going to happen to him.
And he still married her. Well, I guess he didn't know about that when he married her.
No, he didn't know then, but he learned a lot over the years, and he was obviously concerned about his safety.
Yeah, but he stayed with her.
He did, but how many of these cases does the victim predict their own death? Quite a lot.
Yeah.
So you really need to take that feeling more seriously than some people do, I imagine.
Yeah, so all the stuff that Jolynn had told Sergeant Buchanan was news to him. He had not known about Barbara having a first husband, and much less about a first husband who had died of a gunshot wound with her in the house. And after speaking with Jolynn and hearing her disbelief that no autopsy had been done, and the gun hadn't been dusted for fingerprints, the investigation turned around. Buchanan arranged for an autopsy, and the results would indicate the bullet trajectories from up and above. which didn't match up with Barbara's story of the gun going off as she was sliding it out from under the pillow.
Yeah.
And he also had the files on Larry Ford's death delivered to him. And then he began to investigate the background of Barbara Stager.
And what an adventure that was.
I can only imagine.
It's an interesting background. By looking through records and speaking to people who knew Barbara, he found out that Barbara had cheated many, many times on both Russ and Larry. The financial issues that Joe Lynn had mentioned were only the tip of the iceberg, too. Barbara had not only gotten the Stagers into financial trouble, but she had forged Russ's name on loan applications that he knew nothing about. She had also written many, many bad checks at her bank, where she had been suspected of stealing money from her cash drawer back when she worked as a bank teller. So with that book that I mentioned a few minutes ago, Barbara had used a letterhead from a Doubleday rejection letter to forge an acceptance letter for her book.
She's something.
Then she would use it to brag to friends, and she was able to use it as collateral for another loan that Russ knew nothing about. So that's another thing that wouldn't happen today, is that a bank would take a letter from you as proof of having money for a loan, not even calling the publisher to check, nothing.
Right.
So that's a lot of trust.
Mm-hmm.
Barbara had received an insurance settlement from Larry's death, and now she stood to collect close to $200,000 in money, just cash, plus property from Russ's death. So it was pretty amazing that she was going to get away with this if Joe Lynn hadn't spoke up. She could have.
She could have. Now, on Monday, April 18th, 1988, a grand jury indicted Barbara for first-degree murder in the death of Russ Stager. She was arrested that same day. The prosecution did have a solid case against Barbara, but they were still looking for a solid motive as to why she shot Russ when she did.
Yeah, so they say you don't need a motive to convict someone, but I think it really helps with jurors to put the story together and have it all make sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Joe Lynn was looking through records with Russ's mother, and they found a check in one of Russ's bank statements that was out of order. They saw that the signature on the check, which was made out to Barbara, was close to Russ's signature, but it wasn't his. The check had been deposited into Barbara's account and used to make a payment on a past due loan. So the day that Russ was killed was the same day that his bank statement was due to arrive in the mail. So the thinking was that Barbara had shot Russ that day in order to keep him from finding out about the forged check. And if he found out about that, that would lead him to discover the loans and debts that he hadn't had any inkling about. He'd find out what horrendous financial straits they were in.
Yeah, so she was about to be found out, and he probably would have left her.
Well, yeah, he told Joe Lynn he would, but she wouldn't pick him back.
Right. But I mean, if he found out about these financial things, that probably would have been enough to push him over that line.
Oh, I think so.
Because he was already heading toward that line.
Yeah.
Barbara's trial began on a Monday, May 1st, 1989, and the state presented their evidence, going back several years, to explain why Barbara had cold-bloodedly murdered her husband. So the videotaped reenactment that Barbara had done for the detectives was shown, in which Barbara was rearranging the detective's position until she got it right, and she was smiling and laughing and kind of flirting with him, if you can imagine. So the murder weapon was shown to the jury, and they had an expert testify that the trigger wasn't a light one. It was actually quite difficult to fire it, almost impossible to fire it accidentally.
Yeah, that was one of her things, right? That it was a hair trigger?
Absolutely, yes.
So just a little pressure on the trigger, boom, it goes off.
Well, even if you were reaching to pull a gun out from under a pillow, wouldn't you just grab the handle delicately with 2 fingers or something? It's not a big gun.
Right.
Why would you even reach in to where the trigger is?
You wouldn't.
It's not like the trigger is just right out there. It does have like a ring around it. Mm-hmm. You can tell I'm a real gun expert here, but you know what I'm saying.
I know.
Larry Ford's death a decade earlier was allowed to be introduced at trial, as was Barbara's demeanor and her insurance payouts. So the jury was also shown that on February 2nd, 1988, less than 24 hours after Russ died, Barbara had written 2 checks to herself on his account, forging his signature, in an attempt to clean out his account, they thought, because it would be frozen by authorities once an investigation began.
Right. So she was making a preemptive strike.
So what kind of grieving wife would go out and forge their dead husband's signature to get money out of his account?
Barbara.
Yes.
So the trial was also interesting to legal scholars because of the unusual issues that it raised. The first and most significant was that Larry's death, for which no one ever was charged, had been allowed into evidence.
That is super unusual, isn't it?
Yeah. Now, although the United States Supreme Court had made it easier for evidence of unproven crimes to be introduced, nobody was sure just how far that could be taken. Well, in Barbara's case, it was taken pretty far.
It was. It would be the basis of appeals that wouldn't work out. But it turned out the prosecution's best witness was Russell Stager himself. In December 1988, one of Russ's students at Durham High had been at the school during basketball practice when he came across a cassette tape. It was kind of hidden in the locker room. He took it home planning to listen to it. He was curious. But it ended up sitting in his house for several months before he remembered it and then listened to it. And he was really shocked when he heard the voice of Coach Russ Stager. The tape was over 9 minutes long, and the jury got to hear Russ talking about the final days of his life. He said that on Wednesday night, January 27th, 1988, Barbara had given him pills that were supposedly for his sinuses and some aspirin, and he'd woken up early the next morning feeling just terrible, like hungover with a headache and severe pain around his eyes. Then on Thursday night, the 28th, Barbara had woken him to give him some kind of medication, which she called aspirin, but he hadn't taken it. So on Friday, the 29th, he took those pills to a local pharmacist, where he was told that these were strong sleeping pills. So on the tape, he wondered why he would be woken up from sleep to be given sleeping pills.
Good point.
He mentioned also that his December and January Visa bills hadn't shown up at the house, and that according to Barbara, there had been a mix-up with the credit card. He added that on the day of Barbara's grandmother's funeral years earlier, he had found her having some kind of romantic hookup with another man making out in the parking lot. He also described Barbara's scheme of kiting checks. So I wasn't sure what kiting checks means, so I looked it up, and it's the intentional writing of a check for greater value than the account balance from an account in one bank, then writing a check from another account in another bank, also with non-sufficient funds, with that second check covering the non-existent funds from the first account. Sounds complicated.
Yeah, it sounds a little like a Ponzi-type scheme.
Yeah, you're basically juggling bad checks between two accounts because it'll take them a couple days, or at least back then it did, to find out that there weren't sufficient funds. Another thing that couldn't happen today. But there were also some instances in the very recent past of the police coming to their house to serve warrants on Barbara for unpaid bills and bill collectors filing complaints in the courts.
Barbara's defense argued that the voice on the tape was not Russ's voice, despite the positive identification by his students and family members. They called character witnesses to say that Barbara could not have intentionally killed anyone, but they didn't have much else otherwise to use in her defense.
Well, that seems pretty common. People who don't really have a defense will fall back on just people saying, oh, I know they couldn't have done it, like character witnesses.
She's a good wife. She couldn't have done that.
Yeah, which I think really does nothing for your case.
Doesn't help.
It didn't seem to. Jurors began deliberations on Wednesday morning, May 17th, 1989, and just a stunning 44 minutes later, they returned with a unanimous guilty verdict. And upon hearing their verdict, Barbara sobbed, and she showed more emotion that day than she had after either of her husband's deaths. So the very next day, they had the sentencing phase of the trial. Barbara was eligible for the death penalty because she'd been determined to have killed Russ for money. The defense fought for Barbara to get life in prison, while the prosecution argued that she really deserved the death penalty. On Friday, May 19th, the jurors began their deliberations. So their first vote was split, 6 for death, 6 for life in prison. Deliberations continued until a few minutes before 4 p.m., when the jurors said they had a unanimous verdict. The jury recommended that Barbara be put to death, and the judge just went ahead and sentenced her then, setting her execution date for July 28, 1989. And then Barbara was taken to the North Carolina Correctional Institute for Women in Raleigh. But we know that the July date that the judge had announced at Barbara's sentencing was just a formality. It took 2 years for the North Carolina Supreme Court to hear her appeal, and during those 2 years, Barbara joined a Bible study group, she attended church services regularly, and was pretty much a model prisoner.
Yeah, on August 14th, 1991, the North Carolina Supreme Court upheld her conviction, but did grant her a new sentencing hearing. So this hearing began in August of 1993. Barbara had also undergone a psychological evaluation, and this revealed no major personality disorders, but did find she was socially isolated, immature, excessively introspective, prone to focus on negative features, and found emotional closeness threatening and dangerous. All this led her to relationships that were superficial at best.
Well, another thing with the feeling threatened by emotional closeness or real intimacy, a lot of people, I feel, will try and make up for that with the hypersexuality.
Right.
So Barbara's mother, brothers, and both of her sons, at this point 24 years old and 19 years old, testified for her and swore that that voice on the cassette tape wasn't Russ's. Her father was the only family member who didn't testify for her. There were a bunch of friends and fellow church members who all testified about what a wonderful woman she was. Then, on August 30th, Barbara stood and addressed the jury. She admitted to making mistakes in her life, and she expressed sympathy over the loss of Russ and the pain that everyone had suffered. She also apologized to Larry Ford's family and to her sons for the misuse of Larry's memory. She ended by reminding the jury that she had a loyal and loving circle of friends and family that supported her, and that God had forgiven her for her part in Russ's death. Only she and God knew the truth, she said.
This time, the jury unanimously recommended that Barbara be sentenced to life in prison. Russ's mother, Doris, burst into tears at the verdict, while Barbara smiled at her family. The foreman told reporters afterwards that while the prosecution had a strong case, it did not warrant the death penalty. Then another juror reported that the first vote had been 8 for death, 4 against.
Yeah, that's funny.
And due to fatigue and just wanting to go home, the 8 voting for death eventually gave in to the 4 who wanted life in prison.
Well, I guess if you're going to just want to go home and make a decision, it's better to do it in that direction than to say, oh yeah, just give them death. I need to go home.
Exactly.
Although I still don't think it's really ethical to decide because you're getting tired and you want to go home. Probably not.
Probably not.
So Barbara was eligible for parole in 2005, but that was denied. And she was denied again in 2009, 2012, 2015, and 2018. In September of 2017, a Raleigh newspaper reported that Barbara had been granted privileges to leave the prison and go out to lunch with a prison-approved sponsor. This program, called Community Leave, integrates prisoners eligible for parole back into society by taking them outside prison grounds. Although she couldn't have any contact with relatives, she was eligible to leave the prison for as long as 6 hours 3 times a week. Now, I kind of see the purpose of it, and if I'm just thinking theoretically, I say, sure, that sounds like a good program. But with Barbara, I can see that people who were affected by her would be very upset about this.
Absolutely. Russ's first wife, Jolynn, had been told about Barbara's approved prison leaves by a friend who had seen Barbara at this really nice restaurant eating lunch. So this pissed off Jolynn, and she notified Russ's mother, Doris. And then Sergeant Buchanan and the prosecution sent letters to the court and the prison opposing Barbara's outings. Doris Stager, who's 91 years old, said, "I'm the mother of Russell Stager. His wife, Barbara Stager, inmate number 0386206, shot him in the back of his head as he lay sleeping in the bedroom they shared. I beg you not to give her the privilege of leaving the prison. I pray she is never released, as I am confident she would murder another husband for his insurance." Jerry Higgins, who's a spokesman for the State Department of Public Safety, said that Barbara had the freedom to be out and about as long as she is accompanied by a sponsor who had been certified through the department's community leave program. So the program's designed to give North Carolina prison inmates a taste of the world they've been locked out of and prepare them for life in a society that had changed while they were incarcerated.
Well, sure, and that, I don't know, to me that sounds legitimate and okay. Although I understand if this is something you're personally hurt by, you wouldn't be so on board with it.
Well, and according to what you've written down, it sounds like she's up for parole again this year because it's every 3 years.
Yes, she is.
Okay, so we'll check on that.
She's 72 now, and she's still at the North Carolina Correctional Institute for Women. So our sources for this case, a really excellent book called Before He Wakes, written by Jerry Bledsoe. Also, articles in the Greensboro News and Record, written by Libby Lewis and Jerry Bledsoe. There is a Forensics Files episode as well, Broken Promises, Season 5, Episode 14. TCB's music was written and produced by Tristan Capel. If you have any comments, case suggestions, beer recommendations, really anything you want to share with us, maybe just say hi. Anything, really. You can send us an email to truecrimebrewery@tiegrabber.com. Or you can go to our website and write comments there, or record a voicemail. I'll leave a link for all of these in our show notes. And here comes Dickie with feedback.
Today's feedback. The first voicemail is from Stephanie. She has some comments that she wanted to make, and she did suggest a case.
Hi, Jill and Dick. So I'm Stephanie, and I'm from California, and I actually just finished listening to all of your podcasts, including the ones from the Tie Grabber membership. So it's pretty bittersweet, or actually just bitter. It kind of sucks, and I have to wait once a week. So anyway, I listened to the Job Corps podcast not too long ago, and I actually was an admissions counselor for some time with Job Corps, and I couldn't agree more that the program just needs so much more funding, and it has so much potential. And it kind of like when Jill described that, I forgot her name, but the victim, she basically, when she arrived on campus, she was just so disappointed because it was just not like an inspirational campus. I believe it was like an old motel. I almost felt the same way. I was technically at a satellite office, and when I first visited the campus, I was the opposite of blown away. I felt like the person that recruited me to do the job also deceived me, and I actually ended up leaving the job for that reason. I just felt like I was almost a salesperson, and like I was also deceiving at-risk youth into believing they were just doing something more amazing than it actually was. I'm not trying to speak poorly of the program. I just think it's very underfunded. I'm actually a social worker now, and I love the job so much more. So it just wasn't the right job for me. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. So I also wanted to recommend a case. It is the case of Lori Dan. I think she would actually be considered a mass murderer because she did murder multiple people in one day. And she was actually from a wealthy family, and her parents ended up being sued afterwards by the victim's parents because they used their money to kind of just pay off some of the things she did and just swept a lot of things under the rug. So I think I would really love to hear your perspective on that, especially her childhood and her parents. I looked up a beer. This occurred in Illinois, so I looked up a beer. It's called the Metal Monkey Funky Mucker. It's a Russian Imperial Stout. I'm like Dick, I love a stout. It is peanut butter based. I also love peanut butter, and I just think stouts are amazing. I don't understand people that aren't fans. I'm totally with Dick. I love a stout. Anyway, I love listening to you guys, and I'm going to look forward now to listening to you guys once a week. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Stephanie.
So she had a lot to say.
I really like the insight on Job Corps because I agree that it could be a program with a lot of potential.
It could be.
And it really is underfunded. Let's not get started on that, but good insight.
We have some experience with that.
Yes.
So in this murder, this Lori Dan, she went to an elementary school and she shot 6 kids, killed one of them. Then she took a family hostage, but apparently didn't injure anyone there. And she was about to be captured. She shot and killed herself.
So a lot of mental health issues.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting case. We'll look into that. I'll see how much more information I can get.
Well, that's kind of similar to that sportscaster's son we did an episode about, where his parents just kept helping him out and kind of were, complacent.
Yeah, a little bit.
And slightly responsible, I would say.
And Stephanie likes stouts, so she's a woman after my own heart.
Absolutely.
Although I just had a peanut butter stout that I wasn't terribly impressed with, but it's okay. Stephanie liked hers.
Yes.
And then we have another case from Jackie Sue.
Hi, Dick and Jill. This is Jackie Sue from Wagner County, Oklahoma. I have a case I'd love to hear your perspective on. It's the case of Jarrett Clark, and he disappeared in Wagner County on a camping trip with friends, and his body was found 5 days later. The sheriff's office determined it to be a suicide. However, his parents did not believe that was true. They did more investigations, and it took 10 years to solve. Several people involved in this have had strange things happen to them in the past 10 years. And there's been so many twists and turns, and I believe Jarrett was an only child, and I feel for his parents because they had to fight tooth and nail to get anything done. I love your podcast, so I'd love to hear about this case. Put it all in one spot for me. It'd be great. Thank you, and I hope y'all have a good day.
Thank you for your voicemail, Jackie Sue.
Jarrett Clark was found face down in a lake after a high school graduation party. So initially the death was thought to be either accidental or suicide. But years later, as Jackie Sue said, people were charged. And it was there would have been 4 people charged. One of those 4 was killed in an auto accident or something. So 3 people were brought to trial and charged in his death. So I'm going to look into that.
Yes, I'd really be interested to know what was going on. It sounds like there was a lot behind that.
Sure does.
All right, good.
And then we have an email from Paula. She has actually 2 case suggestions.
So Paula writes, Kentucky is a crazy place. I'd like to recommend these cases. Barry Winchell, Fort Campbell, Kentucky. In 1999, Barry, a soldier, was romantically involved with a trans woman. He was brutally murdered in his sleep by a fellow soldier. Then, New Life Massage, Oak Grove, Kentucky. In 1994, 2 sex workers, massage therapists, Candy Belt and Gloria Ann Ross, were murdered while at work in a massage parlor. My ex-husband was a deputy in a nearby county and was called to assist the Oak Grove PD. They had a tiny police department. He said he'll never forget that scene. On a boombox, Sheryl Crow's All I Want to Do was playing. I know the men who were accused. One of them I know very well. This case was extra. Government scandals, lives, and reputations destroyed. Thanks for keeping me company on the late shift. Well, thank you for writing, Paula.
Yeah, all fascinating cases. We're going to look into them.
All right, great.
For sure.
Yeah.
So thank you.
They all sound like great suggestions.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, everyone who left a voicemail or wrote an email. We love to get them.
Yeah, I have another voicemail I might save till next week because it was quite excellent also. It was a case suggestion. So we'll see.
Fabulous. All right. All right. We'll see everybody next time at the quiet end.
We'll be there, saving seats.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.